this president is obstructing justice and he's engaged in a cover-up. And that could be an impeachable offense. As they say, the cover-up is frequently worse than the crime.
Well, Democrats dive headfirst into their new narrative that President Trump is covering his tracks.
But the Department of Justice just agreed to share some of the Mueller documents that the left has been demanding, as the president says he's been very transparent.
Here to weigh in is constitutional law attorney Jenna Ellis. Jenna, thank you for being with us today. So a really big thing happened yesterday that I think kind of got buried in the headlines of the failed infrastructure meeting, and it is that the DOJ agreed to share more documents related to the Mueller investigation. So break this down for us. Why did Bill Barr decide to do this, and what does this mean for the overall ongoing investigation?
Well, let's make one thing clear. The Democrats have never been interested in fact or truth regarding the entire narrative surrounding their collusion claims. And so this really isn't going to change anything. The DOJ has been fully compliant and transparent through this entire process. And it's reasonable for them to release what documents they can under the law. And so I think that it's also important to point out that as of Tuesday, when this whole agreement was reached, the DOJ has said that not one Democrat has even gone in and said that they would be willing to see the entire unredacted Mueller report at the DOJ. So this is just a farce. This is something that the Democrats are just looking to play kabuki theater, and they just want to continue to perpetuate this narrative. So the DOJ is releasing what documents they can under law, but this isn't going to change the bottom line that Trump has been fully vindicated and there is no collusion, no obstruction of justice. That's not going to change regardless of the Democrats' narrative.
Do you have any idea what exactly these documents are, these underlying documents? Because there's millions of pages of documents from this 2-year investigation.
Yeah, well, typically, I haven't reviewed the documents myself, of course, but typically in an investigation, you have a lot of documents that are just production of attorney work product. When I was a prosecutor and then also a defense attorney, you have, just pages of witness testimony. You have a lot of different things that that you've uncovered that ultimately go to the conclusion that Mueller reached, which that there is no evidence whatsoever here. And so the documents aren't going to be helpful for the Democrats' narrative. Again, they're just trying to shape the media narrative that there's some kind of cover-up because they haven't seen the actual documents.
And maybe fishing for information for 2020.
Legal conclusion.
Trying to fish for just information they can use in 2020. Opposition research, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
And Devin Nunes
exactly.
joined forces with Adam Schiff. He said that he wanted to see these documents, too. So a little bit of odd bipartisan support there. But you are right. After they go over these documents, they're still going to want to investigate Hope Hicks. They're still going to want to investigate Robert Mueller, Don McGahn, and all that. With that said, a recent poll just announced, it's a Monmouth poll, I believe, and it says 39% say that the president should be impeached compared to 56% who say he shouldn't. So a majority of people say Democrats need to move on.
Yeah, and I think that that's really important that the American people are recognizing that the Democrats' failed narrative isn't really going to hold water anymore. We see that the Mueller report showed that there was absolutely no legal basis for collusion. So there's no legal basis to invoke impeachment whatsoever. This is, again, just the Democrats trying to hate on Trump. And for Representative Nunes and other Republicans saying, yeah, we'd like to see these documents, it's because the president has been fully transparent. The White House has fully complied every step of the way with the Mueller investigation. And so these documents aren't a cover-up. It's just simply going to the legal conclusion. There's nothing going on here. And so this isn't going to be helpful for the Democrats in 2020. They are, again, just trying to continue beating this dead horse to try to say, oh, there's some kind of cover-up. They continue to pivot their narrative. Nothing is going on here. They really need to move on. And I think that it's very, very telling that the American people are very tired of the Democrats' obstruction of a very decent and hardworking president who's actually getting work done even in the face of all of this opposition.
Thank you. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
We'll
Jenna,
be right
thanks
back.
so much.
Professor and historian Alan Lichtman has correctly called the last 9 presidential elections, and he's predicting re-election for President Trump in 2020, except for one thing.
You think Trump is it in 2020 unless what?
Unless the Democrats grow a spine and do their constitutional duty and move into an impeachment inquiry. And I think the evidence will show ultimately an impeachment.
So is that why Democrats keep pushing impeachment? Here to react, chairman of the American Conservative Union and former White House political director for President George W. Bush, Matt Schlapp. Matt, talk about an admission that you can't win on the issues. I mean, that's what that sounds like to me, what he just said.
Yeah, and it's important to remember what the criteria this professor uses to determine his prediction on who's going to win. And it's all it's a scientific formula on the growth of the economy, the unemployment rate, and this data that is not subjective, Jedediah. So here's what this means. It means a coup is the only way the Democrats can get rid of Donald Trump, because the number one reason why people vote for president in America is on the strength of the economy and the pocketbook and how do they feel about their economic situation and their kids' economic situation. And President Trump has been over 50% in his approval on the economy for a very long period of time. People feel more confident about the American economy than it did at any time during the Obama administration.
So let's just say Democrats go with impeachment. Let's say they do it. Let's say they're successful in that endeavor. What does that look like for them? How does that play out?
Well, here's the problem, Jedediah, for the Democrats is that Nancy Pelosi, some people believe she got the majority in the House because of people like AOC. But the real truth is that they won in a lot of more purple House districts with more moderate members than it appears like these national Democrats who are saying absolutely crazy socialist radical things. So if you look at impeachment, you have this more radicalized voice in the House and Senate that are pushing their leaders to, quote unquote, grow a spine, as the professor said, which means coup. But the reason why the Democrats have a majority in the House is because a lot of moderate voters in these districts turn to them. Those moderate voters don't believe that we should drag this country through a year of impeachment hearings and proceedings and not focus on what actually ails the country, the problems of the country, and try to fix it. So they're in a really tough spot. You know, sometimes it seems like Nancy Pelosi actually seems like she might be the more calming factor,
Yes.
which is an amazing thing to say.
How times have changed, Matt. How
Yes,
times have
that's
changed.
right.
And Obama's sounding like a moderate lately compared to AOC and the rest of the crew. I'm just wondering why they're so afraid.
He has better marketing. He has better marketing.
Yes. But why are Democrats so afraid? Listen, if you support the Green New Deal, if you support Medicare for all, if you believe that those things will help the country, if you support economic plans that are in drastic opposition to the ones that President Trump has put forth because you actually believe that they will work, my sense is that you wouldn't be terrified to go out there and talk about them. It seems to me like they are admitting that those things will not work and will not appeal to American voters right now, which is why they're completely silent on them. And all they're talking about is impeachment and investigations 24 hours a day.
Well, this is really important. So their ideology is now more important. They used to be able to connect to the individual and talk about compassionate solutions to help the individual. Democrats always killed us Republicans on all that kind of language. Now it's all ideology. It's all their socialist idealism. The problem with it is it hurts people when they put it in practice. And there's a little bit of a fracture in that majority. So they really can't get any of these things done because even not all Democrats want to be socialists.
It's all very utopian and academic, Matt.
It sure is. And scary. And scary.
Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate your input as always.
Thank you.
For 2 years, Robert Mueller has loomed over the American political landscape, silent and menacing as a darkening sky on a summer afternoon. His investigation into the 2016 election and President Donald Trump was for a long time the subject of feverish speculation in the press and elsewhere. Yet through all the chatter, all the shouting, all the noise, Mr. Mueller maintained an almost eerie silence. Even when his report was published in April, it was his written words, not his voice, that did the talking. But that changed this week. On Wednesday, Mr. Mueller announced that he was stepping down from the job and going back to the private sector. And in a conspicuous verbal parting shot, he took the opportunity to offer some cryptic observations, highlighting certain parts of his report and what they say about President Trump. First, he suggested, as he'd written, that the only reason the president wasn't charged with crimes was because he can't be.
Under long-standing department policy, a president cannot be charged with a federal crime while he is in office. That is unconstitutional. Even if the charge is kept under seal and hidden from public view, that too is prohibited.
And then he offered this, shall we say, inconclusive conclusion about the president's guilt or innocence.
If we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so. We did not, however, make a determination as to whether the president did commit a crime.
Well, on Thursday, as you'd expect, the president fired back.
I think Mueller is a true never-Trumper. He's somebody that dislikes Donald Trump. He's somebody that didn't get a job that he requested, that he wanted very badly, and then he was appointed.
But it was Mr. Mueller's words that were seized on by leading Democrats. Some of the party's many candidates for president said the special counsel had, in effect, extended an invitation to the Congress to begin impeachment. Former Vice President Joe Biden, the party's early frontrunner, said that in the wake of Mr. Mueller's remarks, impeachment may now be unavoidable. But Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, remains deeply wary of satisfying the party's base through an attempted impeachment.
Many constituents want to impeach the president, but we want to do what is right and what gets results.
Well, the Speaker's caution, I think, is understandable. Polls suggest the majority of independent voters do not want to see President Trump impeached. But the Democrats' position is complicated because those same polls suggest that a significant majority of Democratic voters want to impeach Mr. Trump. Well, expect that classic political tension between appealing to the party's base in a primary election and appealing to the middle ground in a general election, only to get more acute for the Democrats in the next few months as the presidential campaign gets into full swing. Well, so much for the politics. This week, we're going to take a look at the law. What exactly is the legal basis for what Mr. Mueller said this week? And what should be the legal implications? Did the fact that the special counsel said a president can't be indicted, does that imply that the only remedy really is impeachment? And what exactly is the president accused of? And how does it relate to the high crimes and misdemeanors the framers established as the grounds for impeachment? With me to unravel all this are two prominent lawyers. Elizabeth Holtzman, attorney, and I should say former House Judiciary Committee member who voted some time ago to impeach President Nixon. She's also the author of the book, The Case for Impeaching Trump. Also with me is Andrew McCarthy. He's a former assistant U.S. attorney and Fox News contributor, as well as author of the book Faithless Execution, which is also about impeachment. Thank you very much, both of you, for being here. Andy, let me start with you, if I may. You heard, obviously, what Robert Mueller said this week. Is it usual for an investigator or a prosecutor, having carried out an investigation of someone, to say, we're not going to prosecute that person or charge that person with crimes, but we're actually also not going to say whether we think the person was guilty or innocent?
It's highly unusual to have that kind of a disclosure publicly. I think with Mueller, it's important to understand the context in which his report is written. Pursuant to the regulations that govern special counsels, what that exchange was supposed to be is something that happens pretty commonly, which is an exchange between a subordinate prosecutor and a supervisor, in this case the special counsel and the attorney general, about what the charging decision ought to be. So that was supposed to be a confidential intra-executive branch, intra-Justice Department exchange that very unusually has become public.
Why do you think he made it public? Why do you think it went public like that?
Well, I think the report is obviously written to be read. I would say ordinarily that it was the Justice Department's call to publicize it, and certainly it was, under the regulations, Attorney General Barr's call in that regard. But clearly, the report was written in a way that was intended for public consumption. And I think it has always been the case that he intended to give this to Congress.
Liz, is it right that when somebody is investigated, that you should have the people doing the investigation essentially dangling out there, not an exoneration, but essentially a non-exoneration, a statement saying, well, we just don't really know, we're not able to say whether the president is guilty or not guilty of obstructing justice? That's a kind of strange way, isn't it, to do justice?
Yes. Well, first of all, the special counsel did say that there was insufficient evidence with regard to conspiring with Russia, conspiring of the Trump campaign.
They were clear
with
on
Russia.
that part, the obstruction.
Right. They were clear on that part, although Barr had suggested that there was no evidence in his framing of it. Right. So what Mueller said suggested that there might be some evidence, but it was insufficient. Yeah. But that was an important statement. The other part about obstruction of justice is problematic from various points of view. First of all, normally, and Andrew's right about this, normally prosecutors outside of an indictment or a trial, they don't comment on the person's possible guilt or possible innocence. I mean, that's not a job of a prosecutor. But this is something that's very special and very different. And it kind of falls in the middle of a variety of different issues, because what we're talking about is How does a prosecutor deal with whether a president, sitting president, has committed a crime? How do we get at that? And how do we tell the American people about what's going on? Mueller felt bound by the Department of Justice's policies in a legal memo saying that a president can't be indicted. He came to the conclusion, well, if a president can't be indicted, I can't charge that president with a crime. I can't charge Trump with a crime. But on the other hand, if he didn't charge him with a crime, he couldn't say there was insufficient evidence because maybe the evidence wasn't insufficient.
But if you don't find evidence of a crime, don't you just leave it and say, we don't go out there and say,
well, but if I'm
accused of a crime and I'm investigated, I wouldn't expect the prosecutors to say, we've looked into it and we can't find evidence, but we're not absolutely sure he's not guilty.
Well, there's a problem because he is required under the regulations to say why he has decided to prosecute or why he has decided not to prosecute. With regard to the Russia issue, it was very easy. Insufficient evidence. He explained that. With regard to the obstruction of justice, he couldn't say that because that wasn't the case. And so he was kind of in a trap there.
I want to go there. But Andy, what do you think Mueller was trying to do with that statement this week? What was that about?
Well, I think he wanted to communicate the following. I found evidence that could make out a sufficient obstruction case. I couldn't bring the evidence because there's this Office of Legal Counsel guidance that prevents me from doing so.
Yeah.
However, I may have a felony prosecution here, or at least worthy of prosecution. And in this system, the Congress is the body that is supposed to deal with the sitting president's misconduct. So therefore, hey, you guys over at Congress, you don't need a prosecutable in court felony in order to impeach, but I'm letting you know that you may have one.
So it was Liz, do you agree? Do you think it was kind of an invitation for Congress to
Well, it might be, but I don't think that he's right in his reading of what his responsibilities are, because I think two things. One is we have prosecuted, and to the extent in the Nixon matter, Nixon was named an unindicted co-conspirator by the grand jury. So that's withstood the test of time. What does that mean? But secondly, somehow the American people are entitled to know whether the evidence against sitting president could amount to a possible crime. And so everybody's left hanging here, and I don't like that result.